The clock on the wall ticked over to 12 p.m. as Jenna Morales, a 32-year-old trauma nurse, signed out from her shift. She removed her badge, slipped it into her scrub pocket, and without hesitation, made her way to her car. Her destination, a local dojo tucked into a quiet corner of town, where her 12-year-old nephew, Luce, was anxiously waiting. Traffic crawled, but Jenna's mind was sharp-focused. Louise had been nervous all morning about today's sparring match. She knew that tone in his voice, the way he fidgeted with the strings of his hoodie at breakfast. He was scared. She pulled into the gravel parking lot and stepped out, brushing imaginary creases from her blue scrubs. The sun glared off the car roofs, and the buzz of cicadas filled the air. But inside the dojo, it was a different world. As she opened the door, the smell hit her. Sweat, old mats, and the faint sting of antiseptic. The kind of place where boys were taught to fight, but not always to grow. All eyes were on the mat. Jenna scanned the room and spotted Luis immediately. His small frame was hunched forward, clutching the sleeve of a much older, taller boy who was clearly toying with him. Luis struggled with a throw, but his grip slipped, and in a flash, he was slammed flat onto the mat. The dull sound echoed like a slap across the room. Over them stood Darren Brooks, the dojo's head instructor. Mid-40s, lean but muscular, black. Belt tight around his waist, and a voice that cracked like a whip. Again. He barked, his tone sharp, cutting through the air like glass. Luis hesitated. His hands trembled. The older boy didn't wait. He countered easily and dropped Luis hard on the mat again. Darren shook his head in disgust. Pathetic, he muttered. Weak, get up, the other kids snickered. Luis avoided eye contact, blinking fast to fight. The tears. Jenna didn't move from the back of the room, but her jaw tightened. Her eyes locked on her nephew, reading every muscle, every hesitation in his little body. And then Darren did something worse than any throw. He humiliated him. You think anyone's gonna respect you like that? He jeered. This is what happens when kids don't take training seriously. Luis got up again, shoulders slumped, small hands shaking. The room around him was a blur of whispers and judgment. Jenna sat still, her fists clenched so tight her knuckles whitened, but her breathing remained steady, controlled. She'd learned long ago how to manage adrenaline, not to let rage cloud her mind. Then Darren turned and noticed her. Oh look, he said with a smirk. Mommy's nurse showed up. What's the matter? Lose your way to the hospital? Some of the students chuckled nervously. A few parents turned away. Awkward. Darren wasn't finished. Is that why he's so soft? Always got someone to patch his boo-boos? Maybe next time bring some band-aids, huh? Luce's head dropped even lower. He couldn't meet her eyes anymore. Jenna stood slowly. The squeak of her sneakers on the mat was the only sound in the room. She smoothed the front of her scrubs once. Then she looked at Luis, calm, strong, and gave him a tiny nod. One only he could see. Then she turned her gaze to Darren. Enough, she said. Not loud, not angry, just certain. That was unnecessary. Darren stepped toward her, arms still crossed, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. You got something to say, nurse? She didn't blink. You don't talk to a child like that. Not here, not anywhere. Gasps from the students. The parents tensed. This is a dojo, Darren snapped. We don't coddle weakness. You're not teaching discipline, she said, her voice even. You're teaching humiliation. That made him laugh, short and cruel. And what would you know about discipline? He sneered. You're just a nurse. No one laughed with him. The silence thickened. Jenna stepped forward, her voice still calm. Watch your mouth. His smirk vanished. Or what? He asked. Jenna didn't move. You want to prove something? She asked. Prove it to me. The room shifted. Eyes widened. A couple of the older kids leaned forward, sensing something rare was about to happen. A story they'd tell for years. You challenging me? Darren said, voice dripping disbelief. If that's what it takes to show you what respect looks like, yes. Louise gasped, Jenna, no. She held up her hand without looking away from Darren. The instructor's grin returned, this time with a different flavor. He thought he was about to crush her. Fine, he said. Let's see what the nurse can do. He waved for space. The students quickly moved to the sides. The mat cleared. Jenna removed the band from her ponytail and slid it into her pocket. She tugged her scrub top straight. She didn't look like a fighter. She looked like a woman, preparing for another shift. But the air had changed. The dojo felt smaller, the silence more pressing. Even the buzzing overhead lights seemed to dim slightly. Jenna Morales stepped forward onto the mat, not with bravado, but with quiet certainty, not to prove she was strong, but to show that strength doesn't always raise its voice. Darren stepped onto the mat with a grin like a wolf circling a sheep. All right then, Nurse Morales, let's dance. The kids whispered among themselves. A few pulled out their phones. Even the other instructors hovered at the edge, unsure whether to intervene or let this play out. Louis stood frozen, torn between pride and fear. The match began with no bell, no bow, just silence. Darren lunged first. Predictable. A wide sweeping move meant to intimidate more than connect. Jenna sidestepped it easily, her feet light, her center balanced. Another move. A jab this time. She parried. Soft, clean. Not aggressive. Just clinical. Come on, Darren growled. Is that all you've got? He lunged again. Faster, harder. But Jenna was trained in another battlefield, one where milliseconds decide between life and death, where panic is a luxury you don't get to keep. She caught his wrist and redirected it, twisting gently but firmly, sending Darren off balance. Room gasped. You rely too much on brute force, she said quietly. Strength without control is just chaos. Darren recovered and came at her harder. A knee, a feint, a grab. Jenna absorbed every motion. Her years in the EU weren't just about medicine. They were about reading people, anticipating movement, surviving under pressure. Darren finally got a grip on her shoulder and tried to throw her. For a moment, his confidence surged, but Jenna didn't resist. She moved with him, redirected perfectly, and Darren slammed into the mat. The floor shuddered. The dojo held its breath. He lay there for a moment, stunned, blinking up at the ceiling. Humiliation washed over him. Anger rose hot in his chest. He jumped up fast, too fast. He charged. Jenna didn't flinch. She let him come like a storm hitting a rock, and then she stepped in, hooked her arm, and in one fluid motion, sent him airborne. Darren hit the ground harder this time. This time, he didn't get upright. Away. Silence. The students looked at each other, not sure if they were allowed to react. Luis stood stunned, hands covering his mouth. Jenna walked over and offered Darren a hand. He slapped it away and stood up on his own. His face was red, his chest heaving. You made your point, he muttered. No, she said, steady. I made yours. He looked at her, confused. You wanted to show these kids strength. You wanted to show them dominance. But you forgot the first lesson of any real teacher. Protect your students. She turned to the room. Martial arts aren't about making others feel small. They're about teaching people how to carry themselves, how to face fear with control, how to find peace inside chaos. The kids listened. Even the parents, once silent in the back, leaned forward now. Respect doesn't come from shouting. It comes from showing people they matter, that their struggle is seen, that you believe they can become something more. Darren swallowed hard. His pride cracked, just a little. Jenna looked at him one final time. Maybe next time, teach. She turned, walked over to Louise, and crouched down beside him. You okay? She whispered. Louise nodded slowly, eyes wide. You were amazing. She smiled and brushed his hair back. I didn't come here to fight, she said. I came here to stand beside you. As they stood to leave, someone in the back began to clap. It was hesitant at first, just a single pair of hands, but then another, and another. Soon the entire room applauded, not for a fighter, not for a winner, but for someone who reminded them what strength really looks like. And in that moment, a nurse silenced the dojo. That night, Lee sat on the edge of his bed, still in his uniform from the dojo. His belt, once a symbol of fear and pressure, now rested across his lap with quiet pride. He looked at his mother, sitting at his desk, sipping tea, like nothing extraordinary had happened, but everything had changed. Mom? He asked softly. She looked up. Were you ever scared? Jenna paused. You mean today? He nodded. She smiled faintly. Of course. But you didn't show it, he whispered. She walked over, sat beside him. Luis, being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right, even when you are. Louise leaned into her shoulder. I want to be like you, she laughed gently. You already are. The next morning, the dojo was quieter than usual. Students whispered in corners, looking at the mat like it held secrets now. When Luis entered, a few kids came over. No teasing this time. No mockery. Just nods. One even patted him on the shoulder. Sensei Darren stood at the front, hands behind his back, a long silence hanging in the air. Finally he spoke. I owe all of you something. Especially Luis. The students shifted uncomfortably. I forgot what this place is supposed to be. I let my pride turn the mat into a stage instead of a school. He looked at Luis directly. Your mother reminded me of that. Then he bowed deeply. To Jenna, to Luis, to all of them. And in that small, powerful gesture, something shifted. Later that week, a new rule appeared at the dojo, handwritten and pinned above the mats. Strength means nothing without compassion. It was signed quietly in black marker. Nurse Morales, the kids began to call her Sensei Mom. Jenna would just smile. She never showed off again. Never needed to. Because from that day forward, her presence in the dojo and in her son's life was enough. She reminded them all that true warriors don't always wear belts. Sometimes they wear scrubs. Sometimes they walk in quietly, and sometimes they silence the world, not with force, but with heart. Weeks passed. The dojo wasn't the same anymore, not in a bad way, but in a quiet, meaningful way. The energy had changed. Sensei Darren began teaching differently. He no longer shouted or tried to dominate. His movements were slower. His words more thoughtful. He started every class with a moment of silence, something he had never done before. A quiet reflection to honor discipline and humility. And he spoke often now, not about power or belts or trophies, but about purpose. Told the students, you are not learning how to fight people. You are learning how to master yourself. That lesson had taken him years to understand, but Jenna Morales had delivered it in a single afternoon. Luz noticed things changing too, not just in the dojo, but in himself. Before he would walk with his head down. Now he stood taller. He spoke clearly when asked a question. He stopped apologizing for being quiet. He began helping younger students with their forms. They listened. Not because he was the loudest, but because he had earned their respect. Through quiet resilience. One afternoon, Sensei Darren asked him to stay after class. Luis approached cautiously. You've improved, Darren said. Thanks, Luis replied. I've been practicing, Darren nodded. There was a pause. Your mother, he began, and then stopped. She's remarkable. Luis smiled. I know. Then Darren did something unexpected. He handed Luis a small black notebook, worn with frayed edges. This belonged to my first teacher, he said. He wrote down everything. Philosophy, failures, growth. I want you to have it. Lise looked up, eyes wide. Why me? Because you've already learned the hardest lesson when not to fight. At home, Jenna continued her work at the hospital. The world outside the dojo still needed her. Broken arms, broken spirits, broken homes. But every time she walked into a room now, something had changed. Her colleagues treated her differently. Some had seen the viral video. Others had simply heard the story. Patients who once ignored her now listened more intently. Nurses who were burning out came to her for guidance. One evening, a young boy in the E asked, "Are you the nurse who flipped the karate guy?" She chuckled. "I'm a nurse who stands up when it matters, that's all," he smiled. "I want to be like that." And Jenna nodded, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "You already can." Months later, the dojo held its annual belt ceremony. Parents filled the room. Kids straightened their uniforms. The air buzzed with nervous excitement. Luce's name was called. He stepped forward, slower than the others. No rush, no shoda, just calm. Sensei Darren stood before him. He held out a belt, not black, not gold, but white. The very same white belt Louise had started with, now clean and retied. "This is not for starting over," Darren said. "This is to remind you that strength begins where ego ends." Louise took it with both hands and bowed deeply. Behind him, Jenna watched with tears in her eyes, quiet, proud. After the ceremony, one of the instructors came up to her. "You ever consider teaching full-time?" they asked. "You're exactly what this place needs," she smiled. "No, I've already got a full-time job. And one amazing student." Years would pass. Lise would grow up. The dojo would train hundreds more. But that one day, the day a nurse walked in and stood still while the world shouted, would echo forever. New students would hear whispers. "That mat? That's where it happened." What happened? A lesson, not in fighting, in courage. And sometimes, late in the evening, Sensei Darren would sit quietly, notebook in hand, rereading words he had once ignored. One entry stood out, written years before. "True power is silent. It lifts, protects, and walks away without applause." He smiled, and across town, Jenna Morales would return home after another long shift. She'd check on Luis, now taller than her, now training others himself. He'd be asleep, dojo bag on the floor, belt neatly folded. She would kiss his forehead and whisper, "You were always stronger than you knew." Years slipped by like pages in a well-worn book. Luis was no longer the shy, quiet boy who once trembled on the dojo mat. He was now a man, calm, composed, carrying a presence that didn't need to be loud to be felt. The dojo had changed too. Sensei Darren had retired and handed the dojo over to Louise, not with a grand ceremony, but with a quiet handshake and misty eyes. "You're not just a student anymore," Darren had said. "You're the soul of this place now." And Lise, with his mother standing in the back, arms crossed and smiling, accepted. Under Luce's leadership, the dojo flourished in a new way. He created something called silent hours, weekly sessions where no one spoke a word. Students would move through their forms, barefoot on the mat, breathing in rhythm. No shouting, no noise, just movement. Stillness, focus. And slowly, kids who had once been too anxious to even speak in class began to find their voice in silence. One afternoon, a 9-year-old girl named Ava joined the dojo. She didn't talk much, avoided eye contact, always stood at the back. Lise noticed. He saw in her the same trembling shoulders he once had. One day during training, she dropped her stance and began to cry silently. The others paused. Some looked confused. A few whispered. Louise walked over slowly, knelt down to her eye level, and whispered, "You don't need to be strong yet. You just need to stay." She blinked. "But I'm not like the others," he smiled. "That's exactly why you belong here." He offered his hand. She took it, and from that day on, Ava never missed a session. Meanwhile, Jenna had become something of a legend at the local hospital. They called her the quiet wall, the one everyone leaned on. New nurses were assigned under her wing. Patients would ask for her by name. Doctors began turning to her during moments of chaos. But Jenna never changed. She still packed Luce's lunch when he worked late, still watched his matches from the side, still said little, but meant every word she spoke. One evening, she visited the dojo after a long shift. She stood by the doorway and watched as Ava, now months into training, completed a form imperfect. Silence. Luis walked up beside his mother. Remind you of anyone? Jenna smiled. She's braver than I ever was. Luis looked at her and said softly, No, Mom, she's brave because you were first. Years slipped by like pages in a well-worn book. Luis was no longer the shy, quiet boy who once trembled on the dojo mat. He was now a man, calm, composed, carrying a presence that didn't need to be loud to be felt. The dojo had changed too. Sensei Darren had retired and handed the dojo over to Luis, not with a grand ceremony, but with a quiet handshake and misty eyes. You're not just a student anymore, Darren had said. You're the soul of this place now. And Luis, with his mother standing in the back, arms crossed and smiling, accepted. Under Luce's leadership, the dojo flourished in a new way. He created something called silent hours, weekly sessions where no one spoke a word. Students would move through their forms, barefoot on the mat, breathing in rhythm. No shouting, no noise, just movement. Stillness, focus. And slowly, kids who had once been too anxious to even speak in class began to find their voice in silence. One afternoon, a 9-year-old girl named Ava joined the dojo. She didn't talk much, avoided eye contact, always stood at the back. Luis noticed. He saw in her the same trembling shoulders he once had. One day during training, she dropped her stance and began to cry silently. The others paused. Some looked confused. A few whispered. Luis walked over slowly, knelt down to her eye level, and whispered, You don't need to be strong yet. You just need to stay. She blinked. But I'm not like the others, he smiled. That's exactly why you belong here. He offered his hand. She took it. And from that day on, Ava never missed a session. Meanwhile, Jenna had become something of a legend at the local hospital. They called her the quiet wall, the one everyone leaned on. New nurses were assigned under her wing. Patients would ask for her by name. Doctors began turning to her during moments of chaos. But Jenna never changed. She still packed Luce's lunch when he worked late, still watched his matches from the side, still said little, but meant every word she spoke. One evening, she visited the dojo after a long shift. She stood by the doorway and watched as Ava, now months into training, completed a form imperfect. Silence. Luis walked up beside his mother. Remind you of anyone? Jenna smiled. She's braver than I ever was. Luis looked at her and said softly, No, Mom, she's brave because you were first. 10 years after Jenna had first stepped into the dojo, the school held its biggest event yet, a gathering of all students, past and present. People flew in from other states. Old photos were hung on walls. Dozens of black belts walked the floor. But everyone knew who the event was truly for. It wasn't Lee's. It wasn't Sensei Darren. It was her. Near the event, Luis called the crowd's attention. He stood at the center of the mat, wearing his belt, dojo patch on his chest. Proud, confident, grown. He raised his hand and said, I want to honor someone who never asked for recognition, but deserves every word. And then, to the surprise of everyone, Jenna Morales stepped onto the mat. In her scrubs, still in her shift shoes, and the entire room rose to their feet. Not a cheer, not a shout, but silence, a standing ovation of pure, reverent quiet, the kind of silence that echoes louder than applause. Louise handed her a white belt, signed by every student she had silently impacted. "You never wore this," he said. "But you earned it." Tears welled in her eyes. She didn't need to say a word. That night, as the dojo lights dimmed, Jenna sat alone on the mat. She looked around, at the pictures, the smiles, the echoes of children training, from a distance. Louise watched her, and in that moment, he knew. This dojo wasn't built by stone or wood. It was built by heart. By a nurse who walked in one day, not to fight, but to remind the world that compassion is the strongest form of power. Years continued to pass. The dojo grew larger. A new wing was added. New instructors joined. Trophies lined the walls, but none were more valuable than the photo that hung near the entrance. A woman in scrubs, a soft smile, a white belt in her hands. Below it, the plaque read, "Strength begins with kindness, Nurse Jenna Morales." Parents would stop and read it as they dropped off their children. Many didn't know the full story, but every instructor did, and they passed it down like a sacred tale. Louise, now in his late 30s, had become a master not just in skill, but in the quiet, patient art of seeing people. One afternoon, while walking past the white belt class, he saw something familiar. A small boy, shaking hands, tight fists, eyes filled with fear. Luz knelt beside him and said, "Are you scared?" The boy nodded quickly. Louise smiled. "Good. That means you're paying attention." He handed the boy a small cloth patch. On it was embroidered a heart inside a circle. The boy asked, "What's this?" Louise whispered, "That's the quiet warrior badge. It's for students who try, even when they're afraid." The boy clutched it tightly like it was gold. That patch had never existed before Jenna. Louise had created it in her honor. Meanwhile, Jenna, now retired from nursing, spent her days volunteering. She didn't slow down much. She visited hospitals, gave quiet lectures to young nurses, no PowerPoint slides, no loud commands. Just stories. One day, during a health seminar, a young woman raised her hand and said, "I want to help people, but I don't feel brave enough to lead." Jenna leaned forward and said, "Leading doesn't always mean standing in front. Sometimes the strongest leaders are the ones standing next to someone who's scared." That line was later printed on hospital training manuals. One late evening, Lise walked into the empty dojo. The mats were clean. The lights dimmed. He sat where his mother once stood, and then a letter arrived. It was from Ava, now a young adult, applying for nursing school. "Dear Sensei Louise, I never told you this, but when I first came to your dojo, I was on the verge of breaking. I didn't think I belonged anywhere. But you saw me, just like your mother once saw you. I want to become a nurse because of her. I want to fight the quiet battles like she did. Thank you for keeping her story alive. I promise to carry it forward." Luz read the letter in silence and smiled.